Welcome to Top 10 DBA Mistakes Horror Stories Edition. That's right, we've got monsters and mayhem in all of these different horror story sessions. And today, along with Aaron, Bertrand, and myself, our guest is Argenis Fernandez. Before we jump into the session with Argenis, let me tell you a little bit about the event today. This is presented by SQL Sentry, and we have a lot of good things that you can get for free. Just want to mention off the top of our head that you can get a free copy of our extremely popular tool for query tuning called Plan Explorer. In addition to that, we have 3 ebooks now, regularly $10 in the Kindle bookstore. You can get any of them or all of them for free if you will drop a note to sales@sqlsentry.com. Aaron is the main editor-in-chief on all of these, so great job, Aaron. Also wanted to mention that this is presented in conjunction with the SQL Cruise. And the SQL Cruise is something that Aaron and I are both happy to be participants in. I am going to be teaching in 2015 on the Caribbean SQL Cruise, and Aaron will be on the Mediterranean SQL Cruise later during the summer. We hope you can join us. It is such a great learning experience. It's wonderful learning and relaxation all at once. So go to sqlcruise.com to find out more details about it. All right, what are we talking about today? Well, this is a panel session with Argenis, and so we are going to cover just a few things here and there on our top 10 list. The top 10 list, in case you haven't seen that separate presentation, goes into a great deal of problems that we see SQL Server DBAs make over and over again. You know, different things that they do that make their life miserable or make it much worse than it could be if they would just manage it a little bit better. And so in that presentation, we point out the different problems and solutions to those problems. Today, we're going to tell some horror stories and some war stories about how we've seen these different things happen. Thanks for joining us. We've got a great guest today, Aaron and I. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm glad to be here. Aaron and I have been longtime MVPs, and another member of the Microsoft MVP SQL Server core group is our guest today, Argenis Fernandez. Argenis, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Kevin. Hi, Aaron. I've been around the block for a long time. I'm a SQL Server MVP since July 1st this year, so I'm very happy about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. I am also a SQL Server MCM 2008, and now rest in peace, the certification. And yeah, so I basically work for SurveyMonkey as a database engineer, and I do a lot of performance troubleshooting, high availability, disaster recovery, and I think I am what you would call an infrastructure DBA, which is sort of like a weird animal that moves between physical infrastructure of the data center and the actual databases. But you know, along those lines, I also do my occasional bit of coding here and there. So you know, I'm just a weird guy. I do a little bit of everything.
Aside from the DBA work too.
Correct.
Yeah. And you're also very active on Twitter and in social media. So I know I've seen you many times being very helpful on the SQL help hashtag and in discussion forums and things like that.
Yeah. So I'm very much suffering from ADD, so I cannot keep my head looking at one thing at the same time. So I just have to turn my head and look at Twitter, because otherwise I feel bad. And then I look at SQL Help. If anybody jumps in with a question and I happen to know the answer to it, more than happy to provide some assistance there.
You know, one of the things that Aaron and I really look forward to each year is when we participate as lecturers and mentors on the SQL Cruise. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to be doing as a lecturer and a mentor on the upcoming SQL Cruise.
Yeah, so I'm actually very excited about that. This year, in 2014, I attended SQL Cruise as an alumni, and it was just fantastic. I loved participating there. One of the best experiences that we had this year at SQL Cruise was actually with you, Kevin, when we were sitting down with James Steele at dinner, and we were discussing his issues around licensing and all these things. You know, James is a manager of database development team, of the database administrators as well, and he was having all these licensing issues. So we talked to him, and it looks like from our conversation, he's going to save around something like $50,000, if I
Right.
remember correctly.
That's right. Yep.
So just from sitting down and having dinner with us at SQL Cruise, he was able to pretty much pay for the cruise. Right?
And then some.
And then some. That's right. And so that was last year, but this year, but next year, I'm actually speaking on two different topics. I am doing a talk on SQL Server internals, so like an introduction to SQL Server internals, where I'm going to be talking about the, general disk structures, pages, extents, and file groups, and
Mm-hmm.
indexes and unclosed indexes and what have you. And then the second talk that I'm going to be doing at SQL Cruise next year is going to be focused on data recovery and corruption and techniques to survive disastrous events on SQL Server. So that one is also going to be very interesting, I think.
Excellent. That sounds like I will be learning a lot when I'm sitting in on those sessions. So looking forward to that. All right. Aaron, did you have any more comments or thoughts or stories to share on this point?
So I actually wanted to go back to that point you were talking about where you go and ask the SAN admin for a 500 gig LUN because you know your database is going to be 50 gigs or 100 gigs and it's going to grow by 10 gigs a year. And there are a lot of mistakes that people do when they've only done half their job. So they allocated the space, but then all they're thinking about is the space.
Right.
So they accept SQL Server's defaults and they don't make sure that the I/O down the road is going to be optimized. So one of the first thing they'll do is they create their database, an empty shell, and start creating their objects in it. Well, the default, even in SQL Server 2014, is a 4 meg data file with 1 meg growth and a 1 meg log file with 10% growth. So they've got this database that they know is going to grow to 50 gigs or 100 gigs. Why not pre-size it? Why take the 4 meg default and then start populating the data and having these 1 meg autogrowths constantly churning the disk, and these 10% log autogrowths constantly churning the disk? The other thing they don't do is they don't validate that instant file initialization is working. So this doesn't matter for log files, but if you're going to set up a database and have it constantly grow to react to growth instead of just putting it at the size you think you need, then you have all these things that happen, and like I said, log files don't get affected by this, but a data file, without instant file initialization, it gets zeroed out. So every time the data file grows, you have this zeroing out effect that all transactions have to wait for. They have to wait for all those zeros to be written to the disk for the file to grow. And so without that setting, it takes forever, and if your log growths are 1 meg and you're growing at 10 gigs, at a time, maybe even in a shorter period, that's a lot of 1 meg autogrowths that are going to be, attacking the system and making everybody wait every time they happen.
Yeah, I honestly don't understand why Microsoft hasn't changed those defaults. I mean, this is 2014. Nobody grows at 1 meg at a time. Nobody does.
I get it for Express. If you're running Express on your local workstation, you don't want to have this big thing that grows by 100 megs or a gig at a time. But on any other edition, it should just work that way. It should just be, the defaults should be a lot bigger. And there should be some kind of warning in a DMV or something that tells you that instant file initialization is not enabled.
Right.
On the drive where your data files are.
Well, so you kind of have to be careful with that, Aaron, because what happens with IFI is that, so like you said, the disk doesn't get zeroed out. But if you're working on a financial institution or under HIPAA or you are DoD type, you're not zeroing out the data that was there before. You could potentially read previous data that will be stored on the array. So there's a little bit of a compliance issue there with IFI.
Right, and I'm not saying Microsoft should tell everybody to zero out their files or to not zero out their files all the time.
Yeah, but a warning would be beneficial. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Something that lets you check on it, or something that appears in sysconfigurations or something that tells you that this setting is not enabled. Just like all the other ones, like auto shrink and auto close, those settings are set for a database, and they're available there if you check on them. But Microsoft doesn't, throw up some flag and say, "Hey, dummy, you have auto close on. You shouldn't do this."
Right.
Yeah, but at least they're telling you when you have over 1,000 VLFs on a transaction log file now.
Right.
Well, go ahead and tell us about that. So, talking about from our
our earlier slide, our earlier DBA mistake, how it's DBAs don't think enough about I/O, IOPS, and throughput. They tend to think more about storage. So there's a lot of things in the system that, by default, will actually give you less than less than great performance. And one example is when you auto-grow a lot on a transaction log file. Each time it has to auto-grow, it creates a little entity. We'll call it the virtual log file entry. And so the more of those you have, the more of those a transaction log needs. What happens when you've got a lot of VLFs on a transaction log, Argenis?
Well, imagine that you have now thousands of VLFs, and now you want to back up and restore the database elsewhere. Well, crash recovery has to run on that transaction log, and with that amount of VLFs, you're looking at an extended period of crash recovery running, just chugging through those VLFs. When you could have a number that's much more manageable, and it could be, in the hundreds, as opposed to the thousands or dozens of thousands. I've actually seen databases with up to 75,000 VLFs, and those databases take a really long time. Another example of things that could go wrong, if your SQL Server restarts and crash recovery has to run on that database, to bring that database online, and you have to deal with that number of VLFs, your database is going to be down for a really long time.
Yeah, recovery time is a lot longer.
Yes,
Exactly.
and it is a big cliff too. It's not a linear progression. It's very hyperbolic, where or exponential, where the more VLFs you have, the longer and longer it takes. It doesn't. If you add 10 VLFs, it doesn't take 10% longer. It takes a lot longer.
Right. And by the way, Argenis, of all the people I know right now, you get the trophy for the most VLFs encountered. The biggest I've ever encountered was 31,000. So you've seen 70-some-odd thousand VLFs?
75,000, yeah. And that database actually took something like 20 hours to come online.
Right. So if you were sitting there in Management Studio looking at it, it'd say, X number of records rolled forward, X number of records rolled back, and then it would have to read the next VLF record, leap forward to find the next starting bit or sector on the disk or somewhere in the I/O system, continue forward with the rolling back and rolling forward, read the next VLF, and on and on and on for thousands and tens of thousands of times.
Yep.
Wow.
And so, yeah, not managing your VLFs correctly goes right along with not managing your power plan correctly on Windows. They're on my top list of things to look out for.
Yes. Now that is a classic. I didn't put it on the slide, but that is absolutely a classic. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the power plan that comes with Windows by default, it's actually the default power plan, the balanced power plan, which doesn't push your CPUs to the maximum. And what I tell folks is that I think the last place where we want to be green and save the earth is your SQL Server, right? I'm paying a pretty big penny for these licenses of SQL Server. I want power. I want performance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And by running on the balanced power plan, your CPU speed sometimes gets cut by half, intentionally by DOS. It tries to save power. It tries to minimize the amount of power that the system is consuming. So what I do is that I actually go into the BIOS, all the way into the BIOS, and I shut off anything that has to do with power-saving features. Anything that even closely relates to, I'm trying to save a little bit of power here and there.
Right, for the fan, or yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On database servers, that's the last place that I want my server not to go as fast as it possibly can.
Right.
I have actually noticed an increase around the 20 to 30% range just from moving from the balanced power plan to the high performance power plan on Windows.
Exactly.
Use the balance plan on your PHP servers or something, not on your SQL servers.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just nailed it there, Aaron. I mean, if you have a ton of application servers, those are cheap. You're likely not paying a lot of licensing on them, so, and you're likely not to demand as much performance from them as you do on the database side.
Right.
I really feel like that whole power setting situation, and again, it's in Windows, not in SQL Server, but I feel like that is kind of one of the knock-on effects, the side effects of having a company that tries to make one OS that fulfills all workloads. I could totally understand having it on, cheap disposable commodity servers. I can understand it, especially, it makes a lot of sense, especially to me on a laptop, right? Because if I'm on an airplane with no connection to power, then I'm going to want to save as much energy as I can for longevity. But if I'm running a business on my IT infrastructure, like you said, Argenis, give me the juice, turn on the power, let's go. Don't even ask.
Is that the default on core too? I've never checked that. I'd be curious to see if that's the default on core.
No,
That would be pretty funny.
That's a great question, Aaron, and I believe it is, but don't quote me on that.
Jeez.
Well, that's
So
a good.
the best way to fix that, if you don't have access to the BIOS on your servers, because those are usually managed by the IT personnel, not the DBAs, but DBAs can definitely get a hold of the AD guy. Talk to your AD guy and get a GPO that just disables power savings and goes with the high performance plan across the board.
Yeah,
And
I was going to say you can manage that with group policy for sure.
Yeah, but the thing is that sometimes you go ahead and deploy a GPO that sets everything to high performance, and you still see that performance issue there because you really need to turn it off all the way and at the BIOS level. Right. So it's a pain. It's one of those things that we have in our checklist here at SurveyMonkey. Whenever we deploy a new server, that server has to be modified at the BIOS level so it doesn't do any power savings.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was a similar thing to, I want to say declarative management framework, because I played with it most when it was still in beta and it had a different name, but policy management in SQL Server, where with Windows you can say this stuff has to be this way. It can't be any other way. And I fought this week with Windows Update. I had a really hard time getting my Windows Update settings to stick, and I had to do it with group policy. It was downloading and installing updates and restarting my server, even though in Control Panel it said download and ask me when to install.
All right, so let me tell you about this thing.
That drives me crazy.
Let me tell you about this thing called the desired state configuration that's now bundled with PowerShell. That does exactly what you're saying. It's PowerShell DSC. Definitely a great segue. A lot of these configuration management tools like Puppet and Chef are now actually integrating with PowerShell DSC to perform configuration of Windows systems. It's actually very interesting what's going on in that area.
Didn't know about that. Now I know Puppet and Chef are used for that sort of thing quite a bit, and there are.
And now Chef has a DSC module that they just came out with. And I don't know that Puppet yet supports it, but I'm pretty sure they're working on it. But yeah, like I said, it's one of those things that it's actually transforming the way that people do configuration management on their servers, because you are on a more declarative fashion now, as opposed to being just trying to impose a new set of rules. You're just declaring what you want on your system, and the system auto-configures itself.
Mm-hmm. Now there is also some interesting features I've seen Microsoft roll out through the cloud. So there's a system center configuration auditing sort of tool where you can connect your different servers to it, and it will keep track of the configurations over time and show you changes over time and enable you to spot those that are maybe not in compliance with the way you'd like their configurations to be. I haven't looked at it since probably 2 years ago, Aaron, but it might have the features that you want that would enable it to actually do that management much more effectively. So another default kind of horror story for me was the fact that SQL Server doesn't allow you to force a certain amount of free space per page, right? So you have to go in. Well, first of all, you have to learn what 8K data pages are, and then figure out, have you done your clustered indexing in such a way that it takes advantage of filling up the pages in the best way, so you get away from hot page problems. And and then we learned about fill factors, and we thought, okay, this is going to be our remedy. We're going to use fill factors to great effect. Because of the way we had our inserts and updates and deletes happening, our pages were splitting way more than they needed to. So we implemented a fill factor on our servers, and in fact we still had problems, lots of problems. A lot of it had to do with the way we had replication going to dozens and dozens and dozens of servers, and then coming back in a bidirectional replication that we had custom built. And what we found out was that we are actually having page splits happening at the leaf I'm sorry, at the index levels rather than at just the leaf level. So our pages were splitting so fast that the index pages were having page split problems. And so we had to learn what pad index was. And of all the people I've talked to, I've only talked to one other person since 1995 when I first started using SQL Server that also had a pad index problem as well. Pretty huge amount of page splits happening, and we were able to fix it with changing fill factor and using the pad index clause there. But that was the sort of thing that took an enormous amount of research to figure out what the heck was actually happening on those. You guys have any other horror stories or war stories about where a default really hurt?
Temp TB, I find a lot of people just taking the default settings for Temp TB, and like any other database you create, it's created at this initial size, and the log file is also created at an initial size.
Right, whatever model is.
Yeah, and there's only one data file, and they have these serious problems with Temp TB contention where everything takes a long time. They have Temp TB is growing all the time because it starts at 4 megs, and anybody who's using Temp TB at all is using way more than 4 megs. So you have all of these issues pile up, and it's again by just taking the defaults and not paying attention to how your system is actually going to be used and what kind of things you need to set up to make it use the system the way it's designed instead of at the bare minimum that it seems to be set up to be. When someone installs it, it seems to be made for people setting SQL Server up on a very small laptop with no power.
Right.
And doing the bare minimum of development on that laptop, and it isn't catered at all to creating defaults that optimize the system and make it perform at its maximum level.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a really good point, and that is the whole idea behind a default is that we're going to make assumptions. We at Microsoft are going to make an assumption based on what we think you might possibly need. And I think the most common assumption that the defaults are based upon is that we just need this to be up quickly and running quickly. We don't really need longevity. And so we see that with lots and lots of things that they enable SQL Server to get up real quick. They don't actually help in the long run or at the high end or even at the medium end of the performance spectrum. Connor Cunningham tells this funny story, and he's told it in public, so I know it's not an NDA sort of thing. So Connor Cunningham is the lead Microsoft architect around the query optimizer, and he tells this funny story about how they chose the numbers for the different cost of each of the different particular steps that the query optimizer might choose. And I forget the name of the person, but there was basically one person on the team who had had one of the development boxes, and however much time it took in milliseconds or microseconds on that person's machine was the cost value they assigned to it. From then forward, on for year after year. So, the cost of a hash join algorithm or all these different really important intricate operations that the optimizer might do, those numbers were derived just from a particular version of a particular server and OS and combination of hardware on that day and time. And now we have it with us even today. So,
when people ask me what those numbers mean, I say they're unicorn hugs. Because it doesn't really matter what they are. They're not a unit that you can measure. So if you say that, my car is going 50, well, 50 what? Are you in Canada? Are you in the U.S.? Is it going 50 miles per hour or 70, or 50 kilometers per hour? And so when you don't know what the actual unit of measurement is, the number is much less meaningful unless you can compare it to other numbers and at least, like, say if you're comparing two queries and one of them has a cost of 0.5 and one of them has a cost of 0.7, even that, comparing those two things is not enough. You need a third thing, like how long one of those queries takes.
Yeah.
Or how much I/O it does, whatever problem you're trying to troubleshoot. You need a third metric there to even know what those two things mean relative to each other.
Yeah, and there's one more setting there that's actually closely related to what you guys have been talking about, which is cost threshold for parallelism. I think the default on that one is 5, which
5.
means that every single plan with a cost of over 5 will be considered for parallelism. That means that there's going to be an additional CPU and memory resources being taken by the query optimizer just to figure out if that query executed on a parallel fashion would actually execute faster than the query executed on a serial fashion. So a lot of people don't think about these things, and it could actually go in detriment of your performance. Some queries you might not want to go parallel, or you might want to, if you have a highly concurrent system, you might not want to have those many queries going in parallel at any given point in time.
And
So
another thing too it can cause is if you set it too low and you have too many queries that are going parallel, you get all these CX packet weights, and the CX packet weights themselves aren't the problem, but people panic like they are.
Right.
People look at CX packet weights and go, oh my God, we have to set max.1 to this server because our CX packet weights are high. Well, are your CX packet weights high? Is that just a number? Or are you actually experiencing a performance problem directly related to the CX packet weights? And people have this, have a hard time putting those two things together. They see the weight, they see it's a high weight, oh, we have to reduce that weight. And you don't know for sure if the weight is actually a problem.
Yeah, all it really tells you for sure is that you have parallelism happening. It may not be saying that parallelism is the problem.
Right. Another default that people get stuck on and have a lot of problems with is full recovery model. So people will create a database and they have it in full recovery model, and then they sit there for a month and they're pumping all this data into the database and having all these transactions, and then suddenly their log drive fills up. And they don't understand what happened. And it's because the default in model is full, so every database that gets created manually is in full recovery model. And if they don't do that knowingly and they don't set up log backups, there's no real point in being in full recovery if you don't have a recovery plan. If you're not taking log backups and you're not testing your full restores and your log restores, there's no point in being in full. You may as well be in simple, and that will also eliminate the log file problem. But people panic and they fill up a drive, and then all of a sudden they're in this emergency where they have to do shrinking and all this reactive stuff, and it's again just another problem with the defaults that SQL Server implements. I mean, it's meant with good intentions, right? So they want you to have point-in-time recovery. They want you to be able to use full recovery and have log backups and minimize the amount of data that can be lost if there's a catastrophe. But if they just say, here's full recovery, and they don't tell people you need to set up log backups, and not the ones that the maintenance plan does with all the shrinking they suggest and all the deleting the log file or the backup history that doesn't work. But users don't have that extra piece of advice that reminds them why they're in full recovery mode or why they should be in full recovery mode and what else they need to do to make that work well.
Right, and nowadays you have things like the system health active event session that's running constantly in the system. You would think that it will be very easy to check if a database is in full recovery model and it hasn't been taken any transaction log backups in a really long time. Just to throw an alert in there, warning, something that says, hey, there's something going on here. You might want to look at it.
Yeah, and the same thing with auto-growth events. I mean, if that thing can track auto-growth events, it could also tell you, hey, maybe your auto-growth settings are not optimal because yesterday you auto-grew 8,000 times. That's probably a problem.
I would actually say that whenever you auto-grow, that's a problem. I mean, you should be doing the growing on your databases manually, and only rely on auto-grow when you are under duress or you're away on vacation and you couldn't take care of the system or whatever. But you really shouldn't be relying on auto-grow for anything.
Yeah, and you can set up alerts of various kinds that will tell you when you're approaching a point where you need to auto-grow. And that you should be able to, as long as you understand your system and how your system is growing, you should be able to set that up to warn you a week or two before it ever happens.
All right, well, I hope that was fun and informative for you. For more information, be sure to check out our performance tuning and optimization blog. It's all about how to make SQL Server perform better. That's SQLperformance.com, and it's something that Aaron is keeping up with every day. We also have free query tuning consultations. You can go to answers.sqlperformance.com and you can provide us with your various execution plans, and we will provide you with some help in order to make them perform better. If you haven't seen the source video that these different horror stories episodes are based on, take a look at it at SQL Century TV. There's the full URL there, but there's lots of other great videos on SQLcentury.tv, so we encourage you to look at all of those. And of course, you can reach Aaron and myself at our email addresses. You can go to our web pages on SQLcentury.com. And of course, we'd love to get in touch with you on social media, so we hope that you'll follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and LinkedIn. So with that, thank you, and hope to see you on our next edition.